Most people are asking God to change their lives, but very few are willing to change their behavior. We pray for breakthrough. We pray for elevation. We pray for favor. Yet we resist the very responsibilities that make those prayers possible. Today I want to confront a truth that is uncomfortable but necessary. Heaven responds to responsibility, not excuses. God is not moved by noise. He is moved by alignment. Prayer was never designed to replace discipline. Faith was never meant to cancel obedience. And God never intended to do for you what He already empowered you to do for yourself. When you pray for change but refuse responsibility, you are not waiting on God. God is waiting on you to manage what He already gave, to steward what He already released, and to mature into the capacity required for the answer you're requesting. Change does not begin in the heavens, it begins in your decisions. Responsibility is the currency of leadership, growth, and destiny. Until you accept responsibility for your attitude, your time, your choices, and your actions, your prayers will remain sincere but ineffective. Today's message is not to discourage your prayer life, but to realign it so that what you pray for can finally manifest in what you live. Prayer invites divine guidance, but responsibility activates divine results, because prayer was never meant to function as a substitute for action, but as a doorway to direction. When a person prays, they are not asking God to live their life for them. They are asking for wisdom, clarity, and alignment so they can act correctly. Prayer positions the heart, but responsibility positions the hands. Many people are sincere in their prayers, yet stagnant in their progress because they expect guidance to produce outcomes without their participation. Divine guidance reveals what must be done, but responsibility determines whether it will be done. God gives insight, not indulgence, and He reveals steps, not shortcuts. Throughout life, guidance without responsibility produces frustration. A person may know what to do, feel inspired to do it, and even feel convicted about doing it, yet still remain unchanged because responsibility was never embraced. Prayer may reveal that habits must change, priorities must be reordered, and discipline must be established. But responsibility is the decision to follow through daily, even when emotion fades. Guidance is informational. Responsibility is transformational. Until a person accepts ownership of their choices, prayer remains a conversation rather than a catalyst. Responsibility is proof that guidance was received. When someone truly hears direction from God, it produces movement, not excuses. Excuses often sound spiritual, but they are signs of avoidance. Saying I'm waiting on God can sometimes mean I'm avoiding accountability. God does not guide people to keep them comfortable. He guides them to develop capacity. Responsibility stretches character, strengthens discipline, and matures faith. Without responsibility, guidance becomes a burden rather than a blessing, because insight without execution increases guilt instead of growth. Divine results are not mystical accidents. They are outcomes of obedience to revealed principles. Prayer may illuminate a principle, but responsibility applies it. Success, growth, healing, and progress are usually hidden inside daily responsibilities that feel ordinary and demanding. Many want extraordinary results while avoiding ordinary discipline. Responsibility is the bridge between what is prayed for and what is produced. God gives vision, but responsibility builds structure. God gives purpose, but responsibility establishes process. When responsibility is rejected, prayer often becomes repetitive. People pray the same prayers year after year because they refuse to act on the answers they already received. Guidance has an expiration when it is ignored, not because God withdraws it, but because the moment for obedience passes. Responsibility requires courage because it removes blame. Once responsibility is accepted, excuses lose their power. You can no longer blame your past, your environment, your parents, your leaders, or even your enemies. Responsibility says, what can I do with what I have right now? Divine results follow those who manage what they have been given. Prayer may ask for more, but responsibility proves readiness. God increases capacity only where stewardship is demonstrated. If a person cannot manage their time, prayer for success becomes ineffective. If a person cannot manage their emotions, prayer for peace remains unanswered. Responsibility trains the soul to handle answers without self-destruction. Guidance shows the destination, but responsibility handles the journey. Responsibility also demands consistency. Prayer may ignite motivation, but responsibility sustains momentum. Motivation is emotional and temporary. Responsibility is a decision that outlives emotion. Divine results are rarely instant because growth requires process. Responsibility keeps a person moving even when progress feels slow. It disciplines the mind to trust principles over feelings and actions over intentions. Responsibility is the daily agreement with guidance, repeated through habits, routines, and choices. When responsibility is embraced, prayer becomes powerful because it is partnered. God does not compete with human effort, He cooperates with it. Responsibility does not replace faith, it validates it. Faith without responsibility becomes entitlement, expecting outcomes without effort. Responsibility turns faith into evidence. It shows that belief has moved beyond words into behavior. When responsibility is active, guidance becomes clearer because obedience sharpens perception. Divine results are not delayed by God. They are often delayed by hesitation. Responsibility removes hesitation by demanding decision. Indecision is often disguised fear, and responsibility confronts fear with action. Each responsible step creates momentum, and momentum attracts favor. God trusts those who move with what they know. Guidance increases as responsibility increases, because growth expands capacity to receive more instruction. Prayer envy invites God into the process, but responsibility honors His instruction. Without responsibility, prayer becomes emotional relief rather than transformational alignment. Responsibility turns prayer into partnership, where heaven supplies wisdom and earth supplies obedience. This alignment produces results that are sustainable, mature, and lasting, not because circumstances change suddenly, but because the person changed intentionally, daily, deliberately, choosing discipline over delay, ownership over excuses, action over explanation, alignment over comfort, and movement over waiting. Learning to respond to guidance with responsibility, even when it costs convenience, challenges habits, disrupts routine, and requires consistency without applause or immediate visible reward. God answers prayers through principles, not preferences, because the universe operates on laws established by the Creator, not on human emotions, convenience, or personal taste. Many people approach prayer hoping God will bypass principles to accommodate their desires, but divine order does not bend to personal comfort. God is consistent, and consistency requires principles. A principle works the same way every time for every person, regardless of background, intention, or sincerity. Prayer does not cancel principles, it connects a person to them. When someone prays without understanding principles, they often become frustrated, not because God ignored them, but because they were asking for outcomes without alignment. Preferences are personal, principles are universal. A preference says, I want it this way, while a principle says, this is how it works. God does not answer prayers based on what you lick. He responds according to what is right. You may prefer success without discipline, growth without discomfort, or favor without preparation. But principles demand responsibility. Prayer reveals truth, but principles enforce it. This is why two people can pray similar prayers and experience completely different results, because one aligns with principles while the other relies on desire alone. Principles require understanding. Many prayers fail because they are rooted in ignorance, not faith. Faith does not mean wishing. Faith means trusting what works. God does not override principles to reward ignorance. If someone prays for financial increase while violating principles of stewardship, diligence, and integrity, the prayer conflicts with the very system God designed. The issue is not the prayer, it is the contradiction. Principles are not emotional, and they are not negotiable. They operate whether you believe in them or not, just as gravity works whether you understand it or not. Prayer is not a tool to manipulate outcomes, it is a means to discover order. When people pray, God often answers by pointing to a principle they must obey. Instead of removing consequences, He provides instruction. Instead of changing circumstances, He changes understanding. Preferences seek exceptions. Principles demand submission. God does not create exceptions to His own laws because exceptions would destroy order. Order is what sustains life, progress, and purpose. Without principles, nothing would be predictable, and faith would have no foundation. Many people are disappointed with God because they expect Him to honor sincerity over structure. Sincerity is important, but it does not awe. Ye place truth. A person can be sincerely wrong and still suffer the results. Prayer does not sanctify disobedience. God's love does not cancel His laws. Love provides access. Principles determine outcomes. This is why prayer must be accompanied by learning. Understanding principles transforms prayer from pleading into alignment. Principles require patience because they work through process. Preferences want speed. Principles demand time. Growth, maturity, and success develop gradually through consistent application. Prayer may give encouragement, but principles produce endurance. A person may pray for character, but the principle of testing develops it. A person may pray for wisdom, but the principle of experience releases it. God answers the prayer, but He uses the principle as the method. When people ignore principles, prayer becomes repetitive. They keep asking for what they refuse to practice. God often answers once, but the answer comes in the form of instruction, not intervention. Preferences want miracles that remove responsibility. Principles create systems that require participation. Miracles may start a journey, but principles sustain it. God is more interested in building people than rescuing them repeatedly from the same consequences. Principles protect people from dependency. If God answered prayers based on preference, people would never mature. They would rely on divine rescue instead of personal development. Principles force growth. They teach discipline, patience, accountability, and wisdom. Prayer introduces you to God, but principles introduce you to yourself. They reveal where you are misaligned, inconsistent, or undisciplined. This revelation can feel uncomfortable, but it is necessary for progress. God's principles are expressions of His nature. They reflect His order, justice, and wisdom. When you align with principles, you align with God's character. Prayer without principle is spiritual noise. Principle without prayer is mechanical effort. Together, they create harmony. Prayer gives direction. Principles provide structure. Prayer opens the door. Principles determine how far you can go once inside. Many people want God to change the result without changing the rule. They want peace without forgiveness, harvest without sowing, promotion without preparation, authority without submission. Preferences seek reward. Principles require readiness. God answers prayer by empowering people to live correctly, not by rearranging reality to accommodate immaturity. When principles are honored, results are inevitable, consistent, and sustainable. Understanding this shifts prayer from desperation to wisdom. Instead of asking God to break His own laws, a person begins to ask how to live within them effectively. This kind of prayer produces clarity, responsibility, and action. It removes confusion and replaces it with order. God is not withholding answers, He is waiting for alignment. When principles are obeyed, prayer becomes confirmation rather than negotiation, confidence rather than frustration, cooperation rather than conflict, and life begins to move in harmony with divine order, producing outcomes that are not dependent on mood, preference, or circumstance, but rooted in truth, structure, and consistent application of what has already been established. Refusing responsibility delays the manifestation of change because GE is not a wish granted from the outside, but a response activated from within. Many people desire transformation while resisting ownership, not realizing that responsibility is the doorway through which change must pass. When responsibility is avoided, progress slows, not because change is impossible, but because the conditions required for it have not been met. Change responds to order, and order begins with personal accountability. Until someone accepts responsibility for their choices, habits, attitudes, and actions, change remains an idea rather than an experience. Responsibility is the acknowledgement that what happens next is connected to what you do now. Refusal creates distance between desire and outcome. People often ask for change while maintaining the same thinking patterns, routines, and reactions, expecting different results. This contradiction produces frustration and spiritual confusion. Refusing responsibility allows comfort to override commitment. It protects old habits while demanding new outcomes. Change cannot operate in such an environment because transformation requires cooperation, not resistance. When responsibility is rejected, blame becomes a substitute. Blame gives temporary emotional relief, but it steals long-term progress. Blaming circumstances, people, systems, or history removes the pressure to act. As long as blame exists, responsibility feels optional. But change does not negotiate with excuses. It responds to action. Refusing responsibility keeps a person emotionally busy, but practically stagnant, active in explanation, but inactive in execution. Responsibility introduces clarity. It forces a person to face reality without filters. Someone accepts responsibility. They stop asking why things happened and start asking what must be done. This shift is where change accelerates. Refusal delays this moment. It keeps the focus on the past instead of the process. Change requires presence, awareness, and decision. Responsibility brings all three into alignment. Refusing responsibility also delays maturity. Growth and change are connected to development, and development requires discipline. Discipline cannot exist without responsibility. When responsibility is avoided, a person remains dependent, waiting for external intervention, instead of cultivating internal strength. Change is not designed to babysit immaturity. It responds to readiness. Responsibility signals readiness by demonstrating that a person can manage the weight of transformation without collapsing under it. Change often arrives disguised as instruction. When responsibility is refused, instruction feels like pressure instead of opportunity. People resist change not because it is unclear, but because it demands adjustment. Responsibility requires letting go of familiar patterns, even when they are dysfunctional. Refusal protects familiarity at the cost of progress. It delays change by preserving comfort zones that no longer serve growth. Time is another factor affected by responsibility. Change operates within time, but responsibility determines how time is used. When responsibility is refused, time is wasted on repetition rather than refinement. The same lessons repeat because the same choices persist. Change appears slow, but the delay is internal, not external. Responsibility accelerates learning by converting experience into wisdom. Refu. Sal repeats experience without extracting growth. Responsibility also creates momentum. Every responsible action compounds into progress. When responsibility is delayed, momentum never builds. Change requires movement, and movement requires decision. Indecision, often rooted in fear, masquerades as caution. Responsibility confronts fear with action. Refusal allows fear to remain unchallenged, keeping change at a distance. Refusing responsibility also affects perception. A person may believe they are waiting on the right moment, the right help, or the right conditions, not realizing that responsibility creates conditions. Change does not wait for perfection. It responds to participation. Responsibility turns small actions into starting points. Refusal waits for motivation instead of generating it. Change rarely begins with motivation, it begins with commitment. Responsibility demands consistency. Change is not a single decision, but a series of aligned choices. Refusal interrupts consistency. A person may act occasionally, but not habitually. Change responds to patterns, not impulses. Responsibility establishes patterns by committing to action even when emotion fluctuates. Refusal allows emotion to dictate behavior, making change unpredictable and unstable. When responsibility is refused, even prayer becomes ineffective. Not because prayer lacks power, but because it lacks partnership. Change requires cooperation between intention and action. Responsibility is the human contribution to the process. Without it, prayer becomes expression without execution. Change remains delayed because alignment is incomplete. Responsibility also removes entitlement. Entitlement expects results without effort. Change rejects entitlement. It honors diligence, patience, and humility. Responsibility accepts that growth has a cost. Refusal seeks shortcuts. Change does not reward shortcuts because shortcuts bypass development. Responsibility embraces process, understanding that lasting change is built, not granted. The longer responsibility is refused, the heavier change feels. What could have been gradual becomes overwhelming. Small neglected actions accumulate into large obstacles. Change appears intimidating, not because it is impossible, but because responsibility was postponed. Early ownership simplifies change. Delayed ownership complicates it. Accepting responsibility does not guarantee immediate results, but it guarantees movement. Refusing responsibility guarantees delay. Change is always closer than it appears, but it waits for cooperation. Responsibility is the signal that a person is prepared to move forward, to learn, to adjust, to grow, to be accountable, to act without applause, to choose discipline over comfort, ownership over avoidance, and progress over explanation, understanding that transformation responds not to desire alone, but to the willingness to carry the weight of change through consistent, intentional, responsible action day after day, without retreating into excuses or postponement. Discipline is the human response that validates faith because faith without structure remains intention rather than evidence. Many people claim to believe, yet their daily behavior contradicts their confession. Faith speaks, but discipline demonstrates. Faith declares what is possible. Discipline proves what is believable. Without discipline, faith owns emotional agreement instead of practical alignment. Discipline is not a lack of faith. It is faith expressed through consistent action. It is the decision to live according to what you say you believe, even when feelings resist and circumstances challenge commitment. Faith begins internally, but discipline externalizes it. What you truly believe will eventually shape how you live. If belief never alters habits, schedules, priorities, or decisions, then it remains theoretical. Discipline translates belief into behavior. It is the bridge between conviction and conduct. Faith may inspire vision, but discipline builds the lifestyle required to sustain that vision. Without discipline, faith seeks outcomes without preparation, expecting results without responsibility. Discipline requires intentional restraint. It teaches a person to say no to what feels good now in order to say yes to what matters later. Faith often focuses on future promises, but discipline manages present choices. Many people believe in change, growth, and success, yet their lack of discipline undermines their faith daily. Discipline aligns the present with the future. It forces consistency where emotion fluctuates. Faith believes God can do it. Discipline prepares you to receive it. Discipline also reveals priorities. What a person disciplines themselves to do repeatedly reveals what they value most. Faith may declare high ideals, but discipline exposes true devotion. If someone says they believe in growth but avoids learning, says they believe in excellence but tolerates mediocrity, says they believe in purpose but wastes time, discipline exposes the gap. Faith without discipline becomes contradictory. Discipline corrects that gap by aligning actions with beliefs. Discipline is often misunderstood as punishment, but it is actually protection. It protects faith from self-deception. Without discipline, a person can believe sincerely while living irresponsibly. Discipline introduces order, and order sustains faith. Faith thrives in structure, not chaos. Discipline creates boundaries that prevent faith from being sabotaged by impulse, distraction, and inconsistency. Discipline also trains endurance. Faith may begin strong, but discipline keeps it steady. Motivation fades. Enthusiasm fluctuates, but discipline remains when emotion disappears. Faith needs discipline to survive seasons of delay, resistance, and uncertainty. Without discipline, faith becomes dependent on feelings. Discipline anchors faith in decision rather than emotion. It teaches a person to act rightly even when they do not feel inspired. Discipline validates faith publicly. It turns private belief into visible credibility. When discipline is present, faith becomes observable through character, reliability, and consistency. People trust disciplined faith because it produces results over time. Undisciplined faith produces promises without proof. Discipline shows that belief is not just spoken, but lived. It demonstrates commitment without the need for explanation. Discipline also produces capacity. Faith may desire increase, but discipline prepares the container. Without discipline, increase becomes destructive. Faith may ask for more responsibility, more influence, more opportunity, but discipline trains a person to manage weight. Discipline is evidence that a person can be trusted with growth. Faith. Without discipline is aspiration without readiness. Discipline confronts excuses. Excuses often sound reasonable, but discipline exposes them as avoidance. Faith says, I believe, but discipline asks, then why are you inconsistent? This confrontation is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Discipline does not condemn, it corrects. It redirects energy from explanation to execution. Discipline teaches faith to mature beyond words. Discipline also develops self-leadership. Faith trusts God, but discipline governs self. Without self-governance, faith becomes dependent on external control. Discipline builds internal order. It strengthens the will, sharpens focus, and stabilizes behavior. Faith, partnered with discipline, produces a person who is reliable, resilient, and responsible. Faith alone may inspire hope, but discipline sustains progress. Discipline is repetitive by nature. It requires doing the same right things over and over without immediate reward. Faith believes the reward will come. Discipline commits to the process. Many abandon faith because they confuse delay with denial. Discipline keeps faith active during waiting. It transforms waiting from passivity into preparation. Discipline also aligns faith with reality. Faith does not deny reality, it works within it. Discipline respects time, effort, and process. Faith may see the destination, but discipline navigates the terrain. Without discipline, faith becomes detached from reality, expecting supernatural results while ignoring natural laws. Discipline grounds faith in wisdom. Discipline is often invisible before it becomes evident. No one applauds private discipline, yet public success is built on it. Faith that lacks discipline seeks recognition before responsibility. Discipline embraces obscurity while developing strength. Faith trusts that unseen work produces visible results. Discipline does not replace dependence on God, it honors it. It says, because I believe, I will prepare. It acknowledges that divine partnership requires human participation. Faith initiates relationship. Discipline maintains integrity within it. Without discipline, faith becomes casual. Discipline takes faith seriously. Discipline also refines desire. It teaches patience, humility, and self-control. Faith may desire greatness, but discipline teaches character. Without character, faith collapses under pressure. Discipline shapes the inner life so faith can withstand success without corruption and failure without collapse. Where discipline is absent, faith becomes vulnerable to distraction. Discipline protects focus. It eliminates unnecessary options and preserves energy. Faith needs discipline to stay aligned with purpose. Without discipline, faith drifts, chasing inspiration instead of building consistency. Discipline validates faith because it proves belief has consequences. It shows that faith governs decisions, not just language. It confirms that belief has taken root deeply enough to influence behavior, habits, time, effort, and choices, demonstrating that faith is not merely spoken, but embodied through daily discipline, repeated obedience, personal restraint, intentional structure, consistent effort, and unwavering commitment to live according to what is believed, regardless of convenience, comfort, mood, or circumstance. Authority is released only where Accountability is accepted because authority is not a title granted for display, but a trust given for responsibility. Many desire authority because of the power it represents, but few desire accountability because of the discipline it demands. Authority attracts attention, influence, and opportunity, but accountability. Why attracts scrutiny, evaluation, and expectation? Without accountability, authority becomes dangerous, unstable, and abusive. God never releases authority without first requiring accountability, because authority without accountability destroys purpose instead of fulfilling it. Accountability is the proof that a person can be trusted with influence. Before authority is expanded externally, it must be governed internally. Accountability forces a person to answer for their actions, decisions, motives, and outcomes. This answering process refines character. Authority does not correct character, it amplifies it. Whatever is hidden in a person becomes visible once authority is released. That is why accountability must come first. It exposes weakness while the weight is still manageable. Authority is not control over others, it is mastery over self. Accountability develops self-governance. A person who cannot submit to structure cannot sustain authority. Submission is not weakness, it is training. Accountability teaches restraint, humility, and discipline. Without these, authority becomes self-serving. Accountability reminds a person that authority exists for stewardship, not entitlement. Many people want authority without limits. They resist correction, reject oversight, and avoid evaluation, yet pray for influence. This contradiction delays authority. Authority is not given to those who seek freedom from rules, but to those who respect order. Accountability proves respect for order. It demonstrates that a person understands boundaries. Authority flows safely only through those who honor boundaries. Accountability also creates alignment. It ensures that authority is exercised, said in agreement with purpose. When a person is accountable, their decisions are measured against values, principles, and standards. This alignment prevents misuse of power. Authority without accountability becomes reactive, emotional, and inconsistent. Accountability stabilizes authority by anchoring it to truth rather than impulse. Authority attracts responsibility, not privilege. Accountability trains a person to carry responsibility without complaint. Those who avoid accountability often seek authority for recognition rather than service. True authority exists to serve systems, people, and purpose. Accountability keeps authority focused outward instead of inward. It shifts motivation from personal gain to collective benefit. Accountability also sharpens discernment. When someone knows they must give account, they think carefully before acting. Authority without accountability produces recklessness. Accountability slows decisions just enough to introduce wisdom. It encourages consultation, reflection, and humility. Authority thrives where wisdom is valued more than speed. Authority is sustained by trust. Trust is built through accountability. When people know that a leader answers to standards, they feel safe under that authority. Accountability reassures others that power will not be abused. Authority without accountability creates fear. Authority with accountability creates confidence. People submit more willingly to authority that is transparent and responsible. Accountability also exposes readiness. Not everyone who desires authority is prepared for it. Accountability tests consistency over time. It reveals whether a person can handle correction without defense, Venus, instruction without resistance, and responsibility without excuse. Authority is released gradually as accountability is proven consistently. Authority increases pressure. Accountability trains a person to function under pressure without compromise. Without accountability, pressure reveals flaws too late. Accountability strengthens discipline before authority magnifies impact. It prepares a person to remain stable when influence grows. Accountability demands integrity. Integrity is consistency between belief and behavior. Authority magnifies inconsistency. Accountability confronts it early. A person who accepts accountability learns to correct themselves before being corrected. This self-correction is a sign of maturity. Authority responds to maturity, not ambition. Authority is also relational. It affects others. Accountability ensures that authority does not harm those it is meant to lead. When someone accepts accountability, they consider the consequences of their actions on others. Authority without accountability ignores impact. Accountability produces empathy, responsibility, and care. Accountability removes entitlement. Entitlement assumes authority is deserved. Accountability understands authority is earned and maintained. Authority is not a reward, it is a responsibility. Accountability keeps this truth clear. It prevents pride by reminding a person that authority can be removed as easily as it was given if misused. Accountability also produces consistency. Authority requires consistency to be effective. Inconsistent authority creates confusion. Accountability creates structure that supports consistency. It ensures that decisions align with values repeatedly, not occasionally. Authority grows where consistency is demonstrated. Authority is always connected to purpose. Accountability ensures that authority serves purpose rather than ego. Without accountability, authority drifts. Accountability acts as a compass. It corrects direction when deviation occurs. Authority needs correction to remain effective. Those who resist accountability often fear exposure. They want authority without transparency. But authority thrives in light, not secrecy. Accountability brings issues into the open where they can be corrected. Authority released without accountability collapses under its own weight because hidden flaws eventually surface. Accountability also develops resilience. Correction, evaluation, and feedback are uncomfortable, but they strengthen character. Authority requires resilience. Without accountability, a person becomes fragile, defensive, and reactive. Accountability builds emotional and mental strength that allows authority to function under challenge. Authority is not seized, it is entrusted. Trust follows accountability. God releases authority to those who demonstrate they can be trusted with truth, correction, limits, and responsibility. Authority increases as accountability deepens. The more a person is willing to answer, the more they are qualified to lead. Accepting accountability is a declaration of readiness. It says a person is willing to be measured, corrected, guided, and held responsible. Authority responds to that declaration. It flows toward those who embrace responsibility rather than avoid it, who welcome correction rather than resist it, who understand that influence is weighty and must be carried. D with care, humility, discipline, and integrity. Knowing that true authority is not proven by how many follow you, but by how faithfully you answer for what you do with the influence you are given every single day. Change begins when personal ownership replaces spiritual excuses, because transformation is not activated by language, but by responsibility. Spiritual excuses often sound faithful, but they function as delays. They give the appearance of trust while avoiding action. Phrases like waiting, hoping, or believing can become shields that protect inaction. Personal ownership removes those shields. It forces a person to confront the reality that what happens next is influenced by what they choose now. Change responds to ownership because ownership produces movement. Spiritual excuses shift responsibility outward. They attribute stagnation to timing, circumstances, or divine will rather than personal decision. While faith trusts God, it does not deny responsibility. Ownership does not reject spirituality, it completes it. Faith without ownership becomes passive expectation. Ownership brings faith into alignment with behavior. It takes spiritual belief and translates it into practical obedience. Personal ownership begins with honesty. It requires admitting that some outcomes are not attacks, delays, or opposition, but consequences. This admission is uncomfortable because it removes blame. Spiritual excuses protect self-image. Ownership corrects it. Change requires correction. Without ownership, correction feels like condemnation. With ownership, correction becomes instruction. This shift accelerates growth. Ownership also clarifies priorities. When a person owns their OU, T comes. They evaluate how time, energy, and focus are invested. Spiritual excuses often hide poor management. Ownership exposes misalignment. Change does not require more prayer when priorities are disordered. It requires adjustment. Ownership creates that adjustment by forcing alignment between belief and behavior. Spiritual excuses often delay difficult decisions. They postpone action by spiritualizing fear. Ownership confronts fear directly. Fear thrives where responsibility is avoided. Ownership reduces fear by replacing uncertainty with decision. Change rarely feels comfortable at the beginning. Ownership accepts discomfort as part of progress. Spiritual excuses seek comfort before movement. Ownership moves despite discomfort. Ownership also restores power. Spiritual excuses make people feel helpless, waiting for something external to happen. Ownership recognizes agency. It understands that while not everything is controllable, something always is. Change begins with what is controllable. Ownership focuses energy there. This focus creates momentum. Momentum makes change feel possible. Ownership demands consistency. Change does not respond to occasional effort. Spiritual excuses allow inconsistency because responsibility is diffused. Ownership requires daily alignment. It commits to habits, routines, and disciplines that support growth. Spiritual excuses may inspire emotional moments. Ownership builds sustainable systems. Systems outlast emotions. Ownership also refines prayer. Instead of asking God to do what has already been instructed, prayer becomes a search for wisdom to act effectively. Spiritual excuses ask for rescue. Ownership asks for guidance. This shift deepens spiritual maturity. Change accelerates when prayer and ownership work together rather than in opposition. Spiritual excuses often focus on what others should do. Ownership focuses on what must be done personally. Change begins internally. Ownership stops monitoring others and starts managing self. This redirection of attention produces clarity. Clarity produces action. Action produces results. Ownership also addresses procrastination. Spiritual excuses often mask procrastination with patience. Ownership exposes delay for what it is. Change is time-sensitive. Delayed action compounds difficulty. Ownership acts early, reducing resistance and complexity. Early action makes change manageable. Ownership strengthens discipline. Discipline cannot grow where excuses dominate. Ownership creates accountability. Accountability reinforces discipline. Discipline sustains change. Without ownership, discipline collapses under pressure. Ownership keeps discipline alive when motivation fades. Spiritual excuses often seek confirmation before obedience. Ownership obeys with the information already received. Change responds to obedience, not endless confirmation. Ownership trusts principles over feelings. This trust stabilizes progress. Ownership also reshapes identity. A person who owns their life sees themselves as a steward, not a victim. This identity shift changes behavior. Victim thinking waits. Stewardship acts. Change requires stewardship. Ownership produces it. Ownership removes entitlement. Spiritual excuses sometimes assume that desire guarantees outcome. Ownership understands that outcomes are built. This understanding replaces frustration with patience. Patience grounded in action is productive. Change responds to patient persistence. Ownership also improves resilience. When setbacks occur, spiritual excuses blame opposition. Ownership evaluates process. This evaluation leads to adjustment rather than abandonment. Change rarely follows a straight line. Ownership keeps movement going through adaptation. Ownership creates alignment between words and actions. Spiritual excuses create contradiction. Change responds to alignment. When belief and behavior match, progress accelerates. Ownership enforces that match daily. Ownership also cultivates humility. It acknowledges that growth is needed. Spiritual excuses defend current behavior. Ownership invites learning. Learning fuels improvement. Improvement fuels change. Ownership transforms waiting into working. It understands that preparation often precedes manifestation. Spiritual excuses wait for manifestation without preparation. Ownership prepares daily. Preparation shortens the distance to change. Ownership produces confidence grounded in action. Spiritual excuses produce hope without evidence. Evidence builds confidence. Change responds to confidence rooted in consistency. Ownership keeps focus on responsibility rather than results. Results follow responsibility. Spiritual excuses chase outcomes. Ownership builds foundations. Foundations sustain outcomes. Change begins when personal ownership replaces spiritual excuses because ownership activates discipline. C. Clarity, courage, consistency, humility, resilience, and action, shifting life from passive expectation to intentional participation, from explanation to execution, from delay to direction, from comfort to growth, and from spiritual language without movement to faith expressed through daily responsibility, consistent obedience, deliberate choices, and committed action without waiting for perfect conditions, complete understanding, or external permission.